Hello, I'm Christine Zips, founder of Zips Media and Wired Schools. Today, we are gathering for our August meeting of the Safer Alternatives to Government Schools, our SAGS group. We are growing and building an excellent momentum. But today, we're honored to be joined by three guest presenters. Keynote speaker today is Alex Newman, and followed by John Kleisik and Colleen Prain. I'll be introducing them before they speak. So today we're following a theme generally, about an ode actually to the late Charlotte Thompson Isserbeet, and from her book, The True Goal of School Choice, exposing the threat of tax-funded charter schools that are governed by unelected officials rather than elected school boards. So again, we're grateful to be joined by Alex and John and Colleen. And I'd like to welcome Alex to our group meeting today. And Alex is an award-winning international journalist with a global reputation for hard-hitting reporting and the founder of Liberty Sentinel. He plans on speaking today on how governments are coming after homeschoolers, if I have that right. Of course, Alex, you're welcome to go whatever direction you have, and we give you the floor. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you very much for having me, Christine. It's great to be here. All right, so I've been asked to speak on safer alternatives to the public school system. And I always tell people, only half joking, that putting your kid in a closet for 8 hours a day would be a safer alternative to public schools. And I'm only half kidding, because at least your closet is not designed to dumb down, indoctrinate, and sexualize and harm your child. And so, with all kidding aside, I think it's absolutely critical to pull the children out. And I do believe almost anything would be a safer alternative to the government indoctrination system masquerading as an education system. But with that out of the way, I'll start off by saying I believe homeschooling to be really the gold standard for families that can and are willing to do it. I think it's a frightening prospect to a lot of parents. There's a lot of unknowns. It's kind of outside of the norm. When they were children, they went to public school, and the homeschool kids were like kind of weird, or at least they were perceived that way by the establishment and the fake media. But today we have incredible data showing the amazing benefits of home education. And I tell people, home education is not an experiment. It's not a new thing. The vast majority of our founding fathers were primarily educated at home. In fact, homeschooling was the norm in our country up until World War I, which is the first time a majority of American children were placed in government indoctrination centers masquerading as schools. And of course, they were much better back then. But I just want to remind people that homeschooling has been the norm for virtually all of human history. Nobody knows more about your children. Nobody loves your children more than you do. And what I think is very interesting is that the data actually just shows so clearly the superiority of home education over government schools. Right now, we have over 5 million children in America who are being schooled or educated at home. There have been about 8 million who have been homeschooled at some point. Homeschooling is growing rapidly, but we've got millions who've already gone through the process. And even on the standardized tests, the government's own tests, what you'll find is that homeschoolers still run circles around the victims of government schools. They're ending typically in the 90th percentile on these standardized tests. And of course, the government schools spend a big part of every day teaching the kids to the tests, trying to get them ready for these tests. Homeschoolers typically spend no time preparing for these tests, and yet they do significantly better. This is true even if the mother has no high school diploma, and all of this happens at less than 5% of the cost that government schools spend to educate a child. And I mentioned, the degree. A lot of parents say, well, I don't have a degree. I'm not qualified for this. I don't have an education degree or a teaching certificate. The reality is that children in government school, even when their parents have a master's degree or a teaching certificate, will score on average 25 to 30% lower than the average homeschooler whose parent has a high school diploma or less. And all this data you can find at the National Home Education Research Institute, probably the world's preeminent aggregator of data and studies in the peer-reviewed peer-reviewed literature on home education. The anecdotal data is amazing as well. Homeschoolers now just dominate the spelling bees, the science fairs, the engineering fairs. And what you'll find is that even a lot of the Ivy League universities now have special committees that are out scouring the country looking for homeschooled children. And so that addresses a concern that a lot of parents have. Well, if I do put my children in a homeschool or a co-op, are they going to be able to get into college? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, the colleges are desperate for homeschoolers because they know homeschoolers are doing better on pretty much every metric. They're going to get better jobs. They're going to take less drugs. They're going to be better students. They're going to earn more money in the future and provide more money for their college endowment. Right? So there's a lot of reasons why universities are actively recruiting homeschoolers. Even on the socialization question, you very often hear this criticism, well, what about socialization? How are my children going to be socialized? And there's several ways to address that. First of all, I would point out that it is a total myth that homeschoolers just stay at home all day and are isolated from other children and from other people. That is totally fraudulent. In our personal homeschool here, we're members of 3 different co-ops. So 3 days out of the week, our children are interacting with other adults, with other children. Of course, they're in sports, they're in church. So our children are constantly spending time with other children, other families. And usually these are good interactions, right? So there's no peer pressure. Nobody's going to bully them because they don't have the newest shoes. Nobody's going to pressure them into drinking or smoking pot or whatever. And so on socialization indices, homeschoolers are, again, running circles around the victims of government schools. And you find this very, very clearly in the data. Again, go to the National Home Education Research Institute. They have a better self-image. They have less problem behaviors, less peer dependence, better communication skills. They interact better with children of all ages. And again, they do much better as adults as well. They're more likely to go to college. They're more likely to have a good job. And they're also more likely to be active civically. And incidentally, the data shows they're also more tolerant than victims of government schools, which really runs contrary to the narrative that is being spun by the haters of homeschooling. There are some other myths about home education, right? I think a lot of people want everyone to believe that homeschoolers are just religious fundamentalists, and some are. It's certainly true. A lot of parents who want to pass their religious values and beliefs down to the next generation do choose to homeschool for that reason and others. But there's some interesting data from the National Household Education Surveys program. This came out in 2016. The top reason why parents gave for homeschooling was a concern about the environment of other schools. The next highest reason was a desire to provide moral instruction. 67% of parents cited that as one of their reasons. 61% cited dissatisfaction with academic instruction in the government schools and other schools. Only 51% cited a desire to provide religious instruction. So, this myth that homeschoolers are all a bunch of Christian fundamentalists is simply not accurate. It's not based in reality. So I do believe that homeschooling is the best possible option. I think the data shows that very clearly. And, when I read the Bible, I'm a Christian. And when I read the Bible, I see very clearly over and over again in the scriptures, God assigns the primary responsibility over the education, the discipling, and the training of children to parents, not to Caesar, not to government, not even to the church, right? And that's not to say there's no role at all, a supplemental role for the church and for Christian schools. I certainly believe that God has given us the liberty to delegate some of these tasks to others. If I don't know calculus, I may hire somebody to teach my kids calculus. I may enroll them in some sort of program, or we may get involved in a co-op where a different parent can help teach my children that. So, I don't mean to suggest that there's something wrong with delegating some of our responsibilities as parents to others. In fact, I think that's an important part of a well-rounded education. But I do believe that education primarily controlled and directed by the parents is the gold standard. It is the best way to go. There are a wonderful array of private schools and Christian schools all across the country that are very, very good as well. I always start with the caveat, be careful, folks, because there are some so-called Christian schools and some private schools that are just as bad, in some cases even worse than the government schools. And there's no reason for parents to spend tens of thousands of dollars for their children to be brainwashed with the same garbage and the same propaganda that they're getting in the government school system. So I do encourage parents to do their due diligence before trusting their children to any other institution, whether that be a private school, Christian school, charter school, whatever. Now, something like 25% of all the schools in America are private, and well over 10% of American students go to some sort of private school. About 80% of those private schools are religious. The vast majority are either Protestant schools or Catholic schools here in America, parochial schools, but there are also Jewish schools, there are Muslim schools, and there are other faiths that also operate their own education systems. And so, I think all this is very encouraging, but I do want to warn parents to be very careful. There are some really great online alternatives that have been coming up. I actually have been with the FreedomProject Academy from the very beginning. I was the first teacher they hired. It's an online classical K through 12 Christian school, and we provide instruction. We started, I think, with like 20 students or something, and now we've grown to well over 1,000 just in a decade. And they come from all over the country. In fact, I think over a dozen different countries are represented in the school, and it's a very, very good option for parents who do want to be primarily in charge of the education of their children, but who want a partner to come alongside them and help out. And one of the nice things about Freedom Project is you can do either the full program, right, K through 12, all the classes, et cetera. It's fully accredited, or you can just do a la carte, right? If you're a homeschool parent and you're quite capable and confident in your ability to teach math and history, but you don't know about science, but you can just farm out whatever responsibilities you don't want to take on, like maybe Latin or chemistry or whatever the case may be. It is a wonderful alternative, and there are many other alternatives that are working in this realm. There are more and more online schools that are popping up that you can turn to. The Freedom Project also partners with churches all across the country. So if a church wants to set up kind of an online private school inside of their church, all they need is the computers and the kids, and all the instruction can be provided by Freedom Project. And again, there are other options out there. When it comes to curriculum, there are so many good ones today. I tell people there's never been a better time to operate outside of the system. And one of the ministries that I really, really like, I support it very strongly. I don't have any formal relationship with them, but I love what they do. It's called the Foundation for American Christian Education, started by two wonderful ladies who were actually public school teachers generations ago. And they saw that the deteriorating quality, the decay of moral values, and they got very concerned. And so they did a deep dive into what kind of education Americans received prior to the advent of government schooling. And some very interesting things were learned. They put their findings in some books, and they came up with this method that they call the principal approach. I think it is phenomenal. I can't recommend it highly enough. There are hundreds of principal approach schools all over the country. There are many here in around the world. I've visited and spoken at some of these schools. I spoke at the big one in Oklahoma City. I think it's called the Christian Heritage Academy. They have over 600 students there. Wonderful, wonderful school. There's another one in Virginia called Stonebridge School, another fantastic educational institution. And again, what you find is these students are scoring drastically higher on the standardized test, the government's test, the SATs, all the rest of it. And they're also graduating with a biblical worldview. They're looking at the world through a biblical lens. And, for Christian parents, I know that is an essential element of a good education. So for Christian parents who are looking for good Christian options, I highly recommend the principal approach. They actually are developing a curriculum called the NOAA plan, I believe. Some really, really great alternatives there. We have a lot of resources. We started a ministry a few years ago called Public School Exit. I serve as executive director. It is a volunteer position. It's not a job. It's a labor of love for me, but we have a lot of different resources there that parents can turn to. We have a page on school options where we'll give you a list of schools that we recommend, either brick and mortar, private, traditional Christian schools, or online schools or different programs. We'll give you all the legal information. One of our board members, who was the Secretary of Public Instruction in Arizona, basically the Secretary of Education for the state of Arizona until a few years ago. She's no longer serving there. She said it's hopeless. You can't reform the system, but she is doing amazing work. And so she reviewed the legal situation in all 50 states. So that is available on the website. You can find out, if you want to homeschool in your state, what documents, papers do you have to submit, if any, what requirements do you have to meet, et cetera, to be able to do that. So a lot of resources there. We actually have a network of private schools all across the country that have submitted answers to questionnaires that we've asked to determine whether we would endorse them. So we have a lot of schools that we have endorsed there that we highly recommend to people in those areas. Resources on just the data, if you're curious about how do private schoolers do, how do homeschoolers do, et cetera. And there's just an incredible array of options out there. We are very concerned about the effort to bring these private schools under control of government. We think there are several mechanisms that they're trying to use. One is just outright coming out and banning or regulating these alternatives, but we think the most promising one, and we've seen them talk about it quite a bit, is starting to divert taxpayer money to these private schools, Christian schools, independent schools, and then use that as a mechanism to get the hooks in them and bring them under government control. So we're very concerned about preserving the independence of home education and private schools, and that's a big fight that we're taking on now. I think we have a couple minutes left. If anybody has a question, I'm happy to answer it. And if not, we can just leave it at that. But again, I do recommend very highly home education, homeschooling, in my opinion, the gold standard by far. But then there are some great resources out there, including private schools, for parents who don't feel like they can do it all on their own. And I'll hand it back to you now, Christine.
Thank you, Alex. Jam-packed, so wonderful. You just gave us so much wonderful information. And as Alex mentioned, we are opening up for question and answer with his few remaining minutes. If you would like to speak, feel free to just turn on your video, your audio, and ask a question of Alex if you have any. Otherwise, we'll consider that he covered everything so well. Okay, we have one coming in through chat. Oh, we have a couple coming through chat. Wonderful. Colleen is asking, please ask him to repeat that website with all the info and endorsements. And is it public school exit? Oh, okay. I can answer that. And I didn't mean to mention that I will be including all of these relevant links in the show notes below. So you'll find that there, Colleen, after we get this published to YouTube. But the great question. Thank you. And Virginia Farver is asking if you do radio interviews.
Yes, I do several every day, probably. Very happy to participate. If anybody has a show they want to invite me on, just send me an email. Christine can give you my contact information, and be honored to do that. And I want to mention one more thing, Christine. If I'd had more time, I would have talked about it. But co-ops, I can't recommend co-ops highly enough. Get together with other homeschooling parents in your community and come together. Find a church. Many churches will be glad to open their doors for you, and just team up. You might have one dad who speaks perfect Spanish. Maybe he could teach a Spanish class. A mom who is an expert in chemistry, and maybe she could teach chemistry to the kids. It's a great opportunity for kids to come together with other kids and for families to collaborate with each other. So I cannot recommend highly enough parent-led co-ops. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because our last month meeting, we focused on how to start a homeschool co-op in your community. So that's a wonderful follow-on for that. And just another quick mention that came in from Doe Kelly, that she's, let's see. If you homeschool your child, you have control of whether or not your kids are in Wi-Fi all day and what kind of technology you choose or not to allow them. So that's very true. And we can talk more with that. But Alex, if you have any comment on that, that's great, but not necessarily. I know I'm focused on that, all of the wireless devices that they're around in schools, from the routers to their laptops, their smartphones, etc. It's all cumulative, and it damages their brain and body. So it's a pretty serious thing. So though, thank you for mentioning that. And I can include some information on that in the show notes as well. So I believe we are good with that. And Alex, if you have any remaining comments, or before we let you return to your life, we know you need to scoot soon, but thank you for
well, I just want to say thank you, Christine. Thanks to everybody who's here and everybody watching on the recording. Appreciate it. Check out our website, publicschoolexit.com. Check out Freedom Project Academy. We've got a lot of great resources out there to help you with your family, and also educating the public on these incredibly significant issues. So I'm actually already 2 minutes late for my next event, but I see someone has a question, so let's take it real quick.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Thanks so much for your wonderful presentation. Just wanted to see, do you have any resources for parents who are considering the private school route, what kinds of questions to ask the administrators in terms of what's actually being taught and just kind of things to think about when choosing a private school?
Yes, as a matter of fact, we did in 2019, we did a special issue in the New American about education. And one of the articles in there was about how to find a proper private school. So you can find that through the newamerican.com. Let me see if I can pull up the link really quick here, but it gives ideas for questions. And you can also find resources on that at Public School Exit as well. But a lot of important questions that parents should be asking before trusting their precious children to a private school. And
I'll include that link below, Alex. I know you need to scoot, but newamerican.com will be in the show notes as well. So
excellent. Well, hey, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate it.
thank
And
you, Alex.
thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye for now. All right, so that was wonderful, absolutely. And I would like to mention that if you found, to our viewers who have attended this, if you find this content worthwhile, we certainly hope you will, please click on like and subscribe and share. We would appreciate that very much.